Salam here again with another episode of the Think Work podcast. It's me, Tusem. This week, we're going to talk about a fascinating concept, antifragility. After this episode, everywhere you look at, you will see some sort of antifragility, and that's exactly the point of this episode. But before I dig deeper, I have some things to say. I have an update. Let's just take a step back and go to the beginning of everything. Why am I doing all of this? Why am I doing the Think Work podcast? Well, my main objective is creating value for myself and for the others. I explore role models. I explore different topics that are outside of my profession. And my second objective was being continuous with what I am doing. This is the sixth episode. And because I actually newly started 6 weeks ago, I'm still trying to find my perfect pace. I'm also getting along with the microphone and the context and speaking about so many different things in a language that is not my mother tongue. I understood at the end of a thinking session, I thought, you know what? I want to create quality content. And in order to do that, I realized I need to create episodes bi-weekly instead of weekly. So from now on, I will upload every 2 weeks an episode on Wednesday, 6 p.m. And I will see how that goes because I'm trying to find a pace where I can be continuous and create quality content and value as well. So that was my little announcement. But also, I think I should also mention that when I started this Think Work podcast, I did not expect to have even listeners in the beginning of this journey. But right now, I already have an audience, and I cannot wait to see how all of this turns out. I cannot wait to see the developments. I'm really excited to see myself growing in this journey while also creating an audience, creating a community, to see all these things happening step by step. So in this beginning of this journey, if you are listening right now, thank you so much for listening to me. And also, if you have any value from what I am telling, I always say that, but you can always just send me a DM. Let me know what you think. But in any case, okay, that's enough cheesiness. Let's continue with the episode. In our daily lives, we often find ourselves avoiding to taking risks. I mean, who doesn't like control and predicting, being able to predict the future, prevent negative things happening? So we basically despise unpredictability, but the thing is, there is actually something valuable in unpredictability. The renowned author Nassim Nicholas Taleb, he introduces a concept called antifragility. He says that some systems not only survive in unpredictability, in disorder, but they actually can thrive because of them. So what I will be telling you in this episode is really outside of our conventional thoughts on harm, unpredictability, fragility, and robustness. Well, I have no shame in saying that the first time I got this book, I couldn't understand a word. I was just looking at the first page and I was like, you're done. My English was not enough. That's the main reason why I put that book aside. But years later, very interesting, on social media, I came across an entrepreneur who was recommending this book, Antifragile by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And I was like, oh yeah, I have this book. So maybe this is like a sign to start again. And then I couldn't find the book. So I had to buy it again. But then when I got the book, I opened the first page and yes, it was like, boom, I was able to understand what it was saying. It really pushes you to brainstorm about facts. And sometimes you have to read some pages again in order to understand it. But at the end, I was able to finish this book. And I'm so proud of myself. Where is my badge? Come on. While I was reading this book, I made a lot of notes for myself to talk about on the podcast. And therefore, I will do my best to summarize for you what this book is all about. So on this episode about antifragility, I'm going to delve into the core principles of this concept and explore its implications. I will give a lot of examples from real life on personal level, but also on a global scale. Economy, health, everything. Okay, to Sam, you say antifragility is very important, but what is antifragility exactly? So I can exemplify this with a scenario that also the author gave. Imagine you're sending a gift to a friend, okay? It's a fragile gift. let's say an artwork, for instance, because you are an artist. So what would you do with that artwork? You will really carefully pack it, and then you will put it in a good solid box. You will also add a sticker on it that says fragile or handle with care or something. This is a normal case. We call this fragile because if you let it fall or something, it will get damaged. But if I ask you, what is the exact opposite of this situation? So the exact opposite of this fragile gift should be something that is not fragile, right? Which sticker should you actually place on it? So the opposite approach of this situation would be probably, instead of a fragile sticker, I will say not fragile, do not handle with care. But can we say the opposite of fragility is solid, resilient? Actually, no. If something is resilient and if you throw it, it will have nothing. The final stage, after you throw that, it will not break, but it will also not get stronger. So actually, the opposite word of something fragile is not something resilient, but something anti-fragile. Something is anti-fragile when you throw it, it will actually get out more stronger than its initial state. Let me give you another example. Let's look at the Greek mythology, Hydra. Hydra was a serpent-like monster with multiple heads. One day, Heracles was tasked by the king of that time to kill Hydra, this monster. It was some type of a vengeance issue. So Heracles took his sword, cut off one head of Hydra. But the thing is, the moment he cut off one head, two heads will grow out of that neck. So as you can see, when you damage Hydra, when you actually harm her, she actually benefits from harm. So we can say that Hydra is actually a great example of anti-fragility. Another example, the legendary bird, Phoenix, also shown in Harry Potter. The bird rises from its own ashes. Actually a great symbol of anti-fragility. When it's challenged or harmed, it doesn't even get to the initial state, but it gets even stronger. This idea of anti-fragility, you have to be very careful for it. Don't let it fool you, actually. Because not everything that looks anti-fragile is anti-fragile. It can be also proto-fragile, a system that does not immediately show vulnerability, but where the vulnerability can be triggered by specific situations or events. And identifying these proto-fragilities is crucial if you want to create something anti-fragile. Let's consider another example. Let's say we have a toxic substance, right? On one side, we have a large dose. On the other side, we have a small dose. So this large dose can kill someone really easily. It immediately can kill you off. But if I use this small dose of this toxic substance, there is a possibility that this small dose can trigger a beneficial reaction. This is also a phenomenon known as hormesis, known by many pharmacists. So we can say that the harm is dose dependent. In 1888, it was for the first time scientifically described by Hugo Schultz. I'm not sure if I pronounced this name correctly. I have this thing with pronunciation, I don't know why, but it's described by Hugo Schultz. He saw that small doses of poison stimulate growth of yeast, while larger doses causes harm. Well, the thing is, researchers see this also on vegetables. What we call vitamins can also be a defense mechanism of vegetables, and these amounts of vitamins can actually be very beneficial to the human. Okay, let me give you another example, and maybe you can also practice this for yourself as well. Psychologists say that the more you actually try to control your own thoughts, the more it will become an obsession. So again, harm is dose dependent. If you want to be anti-fragile, instead of controlling your thoughts, not to think about something or someone, you should actually seek ways where you can benefit of these thoughts. I feel like this was like straight in our face. If there are any psychologists listening to me, I'm like really wondering what you think about this example. Okay, how do we really recognize anti-fragile systems? It's very hard because we have conventional notions of success, of finance, our personal finance, and also innovation. So why do I say this? Because success is always celebrated if it's continuous, which is not realistic, by the way. You cannot be continuously successful. It's also the case for economy, your financial situation maybe. It's always celebrated if you are getting rich. Also the case for innovation. We always want to be innovative, but we do not really try new things. What I'm trying to say is we often overlook and not appreciate the growth that actually rises from difficulty. We are focused on continuous growth, economic stability, without understanding the necessary role of harm. What I just said is explained by the author by the term domain independence. We recognize anti-fragile systems only in our own domains, our own professions. Let me give you an example. So imagine there is a basketball player. He can make fast decisions. He's a team player and he takes risks, okay? Essential skills, actually, for a basketball player, I suppose. So, okay, consider now this environment, a company environment. If you look at the skills of the basketball players in a company, those skills are also necessary, right? And if we take this basketball player now in this company, we cannot say that the basketball player will 100% transfer their skills to this domain. It will get probably anxious and he will not know what to do. Actually, he has the skills, but he doesn't see the benefits. The benefits being in a situation where everything is unpredictable, that is unknown to him. So we perceive risk and uncertainty in this exact same way. For instance, someone can be very comfortable taking risks in their personal life, but maybe risk averse when it comes to financial investments. So let me ask you a question. Which term are you coming across more often? Okay. We have two terms, post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic growth. You'll probably say post-traumatic stress. In popular culture, but also in intellectual conversations, we tend to focus on negative outcomes and neglect the outcomes that are positive, like personal growth, building character. We think that stress always have a negative outcome, but it's not actually true. Let me give you another example. You will get a headache after all these examples I'm giving, but the main reason why I kept reading this book were the examples. I really liked the examples. It was really explaining me what the author was trying to say. I'm going to attempt to find an anti-fragility in you right now. You will probably in one of these three situations. One, right now, you don't have any stress. You are no anxious, no stress, nothing. That's, I hope you are, by the way. The second one, there is a high chance that you are right now in a continuous stress situation. I say high chance, I'm not sure. I'm not going to assume really anything. Or the third situation is you just had an acute form of stress. The last one is less likely. I'm going to focus on the second one I said, continuous stress. In anti-fragility, stress is really important, especially the frequency of stress is essential in determining whether you are fragile or anti-fragile at that moment. So we cannot say that stress is necessarily bad, although it seems bad in popular culture, but the frequency is really important. The author of the book Antifragility says acute stress can be more beneficial than chronic stress, continuous stress, because continuous stress does not allow you any recovered time. After experiencing acute stress, you have more time to recover, to respond to that situation, to that event. Let me give you an example of continuous stress, okay? A very utopic example, but it will make the situation clearer, I think. So imagine you are in a situation where a dangerous bear is running towards you. You want to turn and run, but you see the path you are walking on is on fire. So you see there are many stress factors and you don't really have the chance to actually respond because you have like continuous stress. You have the fire that is coming to you and you have the bear that is coming to you from the other side. But you can also have an acute moment of stress. You can understand the situation and you can decide to fight or you can decide to flee. In this case, I think you should fight. Another example of continuous stress is if you have to pay mortgages, loans, or tasks that you are procrastinating maybe. These are all things that lead you to continuous stress. And this kind of stress is really harmful. It's also the case for being in the gym, like strength training. When you are lifting weights, you actually are kind of ripping your muscles in two. You're damaging them. But if you take your time to recover from that trauma on your muscles are stronger than their initial state. So this is a very good example that acute stress can be beneficial. But looking at continuous stress, let's look at, for instance, the famous Chinese torture method where the water drop continuously falls down on the same spot, sucking the life out of you and ripping your soul apart. Chronic stress is harmful and acute stress can be beneficial. Neurobiologists also support this theory where the acute stress is actually necessary for growth and adaptation. Let's talk about other forms of harm. So again, under anti-fragility, we understand that a system can benefit when it's harmed. But there are actually many forms of harm, and not every harm is beneficial. Let's look at two forms of harm. One, physical harm, and the second, informational harm. So the author says that informational harm is anti-fragile and that physical harm is fragile. Imagine I am in an arena in Rome, I am in a duel. I can physically harm that person. I can cause the person to exit the gene pool. So actually, this person is not anti-fragile to physical harm. But for information, that's another story. Looking at controversial content on social media, for example, I immediately think about a name. I'm not going to say any names. The content is very controversial, but it actually pulls engagement from the audience. It gets critics. It gains attention from the media and engagement. Consider the example of criticizing a book. It's truthful, and it actually calls for attention. Critics also signalize that the book is not boring, because if it was boring, the critics will not be written then. It's the same for reputation. Some professions are fragile for reputational harm. And according to Nassim, these jobs are actually not really worth having. You shouldn't control your reputation. You won't be able to do it by controlling the information flow, because people will keep talking behind you or to you. These critics won't stop. How can we save then our reputation? Actually, you shouldn't. The author says, focus on altering your exposure. For instance, by putting yourself in a position where you are waterproof to criticism. He says, put yourself in a situation to benefit from the anti-fragility of information. In that sense, a writer is anti-fragile. I hope so is a podcaster as well. I hope I've become anti-fragile after this. It is said that horses are more likely to lose a game when they are competed with slower ones, but when they have better rivals, they are more likely to win. It's a matter of under and overcompensation. Stressors and challenges should be in the game so you can actually stay in shape and not degrade. I like this example that Nassim also gives us. After a long flight, there is a high chance you will get jet lagged, but you have still some tasks to do. Instead of resting, he suggests going to the gym for some exercise. And after you're done with exercising, you will find yourself more energetic than before. Consider a fragile person, okay? This person depends on things following the exact planned course. This person hates deviation, changes, like last minute changes in their agenda, because this person thinks that these unpredicted changes are harmful. So fragile persons need to be very predictive in their approach. But if you are an anti-fragile person, you won't actually deviations. You don't care about the outcome that the future will bring to you. Also, the way that an anti-fragile person and a fragile person looks at trial and error are very different. An anti-fragile person uses errors as source of information. For an anti-fragile person, every trial provides some form of information about what does not work for you. So every attempt becomes more valuable because you start actually zooming in that solution. Also, a positive byproduct of this is along the way, you make discoveries, innovation. But here's a very interesting thing. Every plane crash brings us closer to a much safer flight. It's a continuous improving system, but not every crashes are beneficial. A plane crash makes the next one less likely, but that's not the case for a bank crash. A plane crash does not affect other planes, but the bank crash, it affects the whole economy even. It breaks the economy. Looking at Silicon Valley Bank, how many companies and how other banks are affected. Also the case for 2008 economic crisis, the usage of CDS and CDOs, it was all happening in America, but because banks from Europe were also working together with those banks, Europe had actually suffered because of that crisis. I recorded a separate episode about the history of money. If you're interested in the Silicon Valley and 2008 economic stuff, you can go check that out. So what can we learn about trial and error? Anti-fragile systems have independent errors. Fragile systems have errors that spread everywhere. Anti-fragile systems are seeking errors and benefiting from errors because it's their source of information, whereas fragile systems hate errors. They want to predict to avoid errors. So this trial and error thing, how can we actually practice this? Don't victimize yourself. With Nassim Nicholas' own words, he says, "My characterization of a loser is someone who, after making a mistake, doesn't introspect, doesn't exploit it, feels embarrassed and defensive rather than enriched with a new piece of information, and tries to explain why he made the mistake rather than moving on." A question to you: who do we call a hero? You will say someone that takes risks for others. The thing is, entrepreneurship is also a risky and heroic activity. It is necessary for growth and the survival of the economy. Entrepreneurs find market openings and they are creating an expertise on that field and providing knowledge for others. But most of the time, they do not get enough credit for their findings and sharing their knowledge. And sometimes they do not even get respect. Nassim says that we have to be grateful to entrepreneurs and celebrate them and treat them as we honor soldiers. There is nothing as a failed soldier, so there shouldn't also be a failed entrepreneur or a failed scientific researcher. On August 21, it's Global Entrepreneurship Day, so I'm going to share his message here. Most of you will fail, disrespected, impoverished, but we are grateful for the risks you are taking and the sacrifices you are making for the sake of the economic growth of the planet and pulling others out of poverty. You are at the source of our anti-fragility. Our nation thanks you. Okay, there's also the ethical side of anti-fragility, okay? We always talk how systems are anti-fragile and how we can be anti-fragile. But the ethical side is you can be anti-fragile by the expense of others. And that's something you want to avoid. And Nassim talks about this very detailed in his books because he feels responsible. So maybe in the future I can create a separate episode about the ethical side of anti-fragility. But we're coming slowly to the end of the episode, and I want to give you a summary about what I learned from anti-fragility. So what my learnings are. First of all, do not rely on stability. Stability can give you a false sense of security. Second one, post-traumatic growth is also real. Embrace acute stress. It can benefit you. Number 3, to detect anti-fragilities, you have to find your domain dependencies. Number 4, seek moments where you can overcompensate. 5, a life without trial and error is not worth living. Number 6, do not care about your reputation. Remember that food would not have the taste if it weren't for hunger. Results are meaningless without effort. Joy without sadness. Convictions without uncertainty. And ethical life isn't so when stripped of personal risks. So this brings us to the end of this episode. And if you got any value from all this anti-fragility concept, let me know. I love to hear back from you, and thank you for listening to the Think Work podcast. But one last question. Are you team Kelly Clarkson that says what doesn't kill you makes you stronger? Or are you team Taylor Swift that says don't fall in love because everything that falls gets broken? See you on the next one. Salama.